You are listening to the North American Kings podcast, your traditional masculinity training ground. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, founder of North American Kings LLC, a leadership development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio. As we all know, the man brand has taken an absolute beating over the past few decades, and it's our mission to change that. We're going to do that by helping you join the fight to reclaim traditional masculine values. Welcome to headquarters. Training starts now. Welcome back to the training ground, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. Man, I guess I'm not supposed to say that anymore. Geez, I'm not supposed to say that either. So what are you supposed to say when you're trying to make sexes disappear? What am I supposed to start with? Rock? What about bear? Actually, that kind of makes the point in a roundabout way that we're going for today. You can't get it right. You're actually not supposed to be able to get it right. The second we understand that is the moment we start winning. I've mentioned this to you before, that you do not debate, argue, or even engage with folks who are not interested in acting or talking in good faith. This isn't about a lack of empathy for the other side. Now, let me get that point made right away. It's not even about a willingness to talk, but when one party, namely you, is trying to communicate in good faith, that usually means compromising something. That's fair. You're willing to concede certain things in order to come to a consensus. That is the natural way of things. When people aren't discussing things in good faith, talk becomes circular, and they lead nowhere. On the topic of manhood in particular, we end up conceding points in an effort to bring peace, where the other side will be unwilling to do so. You're fighting a war that won't be won. You've given away the battle. Eventually, you'll have given away the battle before too long. Just conceding point after point after point. That's not a path to victory. Now, why do I bring this up today in particular? This past cycle has given us some gems to work with, all pertaining to masculinity. Now, having said that, we are going to be a bit more current events focused today, because these things are cropping up so quickly, and being able to see them for what they really are will help us make good decisions later and help you see the future. You guys know what isn't particularly questionable about masculinity, right? It's our necessity to shave. So even the guys who can't grow a good full beard still need to shave. And the company that's looking to give everyone the best quality shave of their life, Naked Armor razors and wet shave gear. Shaving is inherently masculine, and it is a big reason the company jumped on board with us right away. They've got a killer customer service staff and amazing products on top of that. My blade's still perfectly honed after a year of shaving on the regular, and plenty of it. I put plenty of miles on my blade, and so can you. Right now, when you go to nakedarmorrazors.com and use coupon code KINGS15, you can get 15% off of anything in their online store. Go to nakedarmorrazors.com. Don't wait to start enjoying the highest quality shave you'll ever give yourself. nakedarmorrazors.com. So one thing before we get started, my son asked if I would say this on the air, so here we go. Godzilla is out there, and I'm going to kill him. Ha! Man, I love being a dad. These things, the things these kids make me do, they think I can do anything. Half of that is because they don't know what would require, what requires, to be done, right? They don't know what it would take to kill Godzilla. The other half is because I continue to pull off the amazing. From building them stuff to fixing things that are broken to being the final say on discipline, a good father can be Mr. Everything in a household. The drawback, I haven't had a relaxing weekend in a long, long time. Friday night comes and we're doing stuff. Second, I punch out. My wife is our house manager, and she does a fair amount of everything, but providing, making sure they have food, going to work, coming back and fixing everything and doing all the manual stuff when you get home can be taxing, and a good woman next to you will be monitoring your well-being just as much as you monitor hers. But this past weekend, it was making homemade Pokemon costumes and showing them off at the zoo here in Cincinnati. Weekdays before work, that's when I get my sleep in. And just like this weekend, today's episode is going to feel like a bit of a whirlwind. And to be honest, it has been, it's been a whirlwind just to write this episode up. So we're going to sift through the mire here and truly try to see the forest for the trees. Right? That's our mission. Now we're going to start with some pop culture and work our way into why is it important. And we're going to give you some implications, because if you thought that everything we're talking about, it doesn't have any real world consequences, you would be wrong. There's a purpose to this podcast. There's a reason we want to talk about these things. We're preparing you for the future. So this week it was announced that the new Superman was now bisexual. Now, this was a bit of a shock to the comic book system, but it wasn't something that was like too earth-shattering. You know, if you weren't aware that this is just the latest in a string of similar decisions that has been made by the comic book industry, right? Thor, the man himself, the god of masculinity and other things, don't judge me, right, is now represented in comic book culture as a woman. This move happened in the comics just a few years ago. And if you've not plugged into the comic book universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe that everybody's been following for the past few decades is quickly catching up. In Thor, Love and Thunder, the newest installment of the Thor franchise, we will see Thor's on and off again love interest, played by Natalie Portman, take over the mantle of Thor. Now, I'm really concerned for the film for a few reasons. Natalie Portman is incredibly beautiful, but her acting talent is a little hit and miss. And I will give her, she's great in some things, but I'm judging her mostly on her work in Star Wars and the previous Thor installations. Right? From an objective standpoint, the reception this transition received when the comic books did it was extremely mixed, which goes to show that drastic moves like this aren't usually that well received, at least immediately. But there are other examples, right? Robin iteration number 3, Tim Drake, made the transition to bisexual recently. The next generation of Iron Man is a woman. She goes by Ironheart, and she actually debuted in 2016. Hawkeye, replaced by a woman. Hulkling, which is a dude in the Young Avengers, and the Scarlet Witch's son, the Wiccan, are in a relationship. So moves like this are hardly new to the industry. You know, Tom Taylor, writer for the new series of Superman, is excited to torpedo this series almost immediately. Quote, and then from an article from the New York Post, quoting Tom Taylor, quote, "The question for John and for our creative team is, what should a new Superman fight for today? Can a 17-year-old Superman battle giant robots while ignoring the climate crisis? Of course not. Can someone with super sight and super hearing ignore injustices beyond his borders? Can he ignore the plight of asylum seekers?" Now, if you haven't caught on, it said 17-year-old Superman. The Superman we're discussing is John Kent, not Clark Kent. So this is John, the son of the original Superman and Lois Lane. So it's like the next generation Superman, which makes a little bit more sense to people. But again, as if there's something new Superman could do to combat climate crisis, right? Like, what's he going to do? Go destroy China and in India's factories? Because they're the two biggest polluters several years running. You know, is he going to improve conditions for, you know, where these migrants come from so that they don't have to risk everything on a dangerous and illegal journey across the world to get to the United States? I don't see how this is going to yield much, right? But they're playing on current events, fine. But I think this is going to feel hollow. So Taylor continues, quote, I knew replacing Clark with another straight white male savior could be a real opportunity missed. I've always said everyone needs heroes and everyone deserves to see themselves in their heroes. End quote. Now, this is a little misleading. Now, if we're going to straight representation, the population of all these categorical folks, like to be superheroes, if it needed to be equal, then we should see roughly 5.6% of the superheroes would need to identify as some sort of LGBTQ variety. Those statistics come from Statista.com from March 2021. And these numbers have been climbing since 2012. I mean, it's not... we're looking at 2012 was 3.5%, 2013, 3.6%, 2014, 3.7%, and it starts climbing. Why? Because we're making a big deal about it now. And those numbers may not represent everything here, right? Again, statistics can lie. I've told you that before, right? So it would seem that we're either seeing just the major characters come out in comparison to the rest of the population of secondary characters. I mentioned to you a list of comic book major heroes that are being replaced, changed. You know, we're going through some things in order to make everybody feel included, but it feels like an overcorrection, right? So they're either going to say, if we were to say, hey, make it 5.6%, that's your real representation. Well, they're going to say, well, all these things we've changed just happen to be the big ones. But in the comic book universe, there are hundreds of little characters. So deal with it. All right. They're going to do what they want anyway, right? So it's either that we've overcorrected as a culture, which may be the case, or we're being conditioned. I tend to believe the third. Now, this stinks of conditioning. All right, now let's go through this. Being gay does not take away much in the way of manhood for people. Okay? Now, I bet you didn't see that opinion coming from me. Okay, but that is the case. No, the opinion of the show is that being gay doesn't make someone less of a man. I've got gay friends. I've got one that particularly is only attracted to masculine gay men. They're out there. All right? If you don't have experience with them, go look. Okay? And he's a big masculine dude himself. And he's not talking just physicality. Right? Like the guys he's attracted to, this friend of mine, they need to act masculine. Now, this gentleman described a phone call where a gentleman destroyed his chances with my friend. Now, on the surface, this guy was what my friend would be attracted to until this guy started talking about his, hygiene routine. Okay? Like, getting ready for his date. His routine pushed him in the feminine direction. Now, according to my friend, he could see the quote-unquote the bitch come out of this guy. And objectively, when I heard this for the first time, it was objectively hilarious. And let's look at this with eyes wide open, though. Okay? Outside of it being funny to hear that from a friend of mine, the thing that made him seem feminine, this dude he was attracted to, had nothing to do with gay stuff. It was a behavior that he picked up along the way that made my friend unattracted to him. Everything else was fine, but that initial reaction sort of tainted everything. All right? Being gay doesn't make anyone less masculine, but it does rob someone of key opportunities to multiply their masculinity. We've talked about that, right? To be a natural father with a wife and family that's your own, that's blood, it means a lot. And it's different, and statistics and studies will show this in children, that a natural-born mother and father are key to developing children. Everybody else who's had an alternative family and turns out great, that's great. But they start out at a disadvantage. All right? Now, it also being gay does expose you to an environment where you're surrounded with more and more femininity. That's a problem. Sociologists and psychologists agree that we absorb traits from the people that we associate with. If you are seeped in femininity, or even just an approximation of real femininity for too long, you'll develop habits that will make you more feminine. Your priorities change. The thought patterns that you have reinforced will take you in the opposite direction of masculinity. Right? It's nothing against gay people. That is how humans are built. We function this way. So we're seeing this crop up everywhere, this inclusion matrix, right? It isn't simply about the inclusion of characters. This conversation happened a while back when there wasn't enough racial diversity amongst the superhero ranks for everyone's taste. You know, what was the talk? Change the races of the heroes. Now, whenever this happens, people forget that there's culture associated with, with being a member of the LGBTQ community or with coming with another race. I've had this conversation with every race out there. So I've talked to Asian people about this. I've talked to black people about this. I've talked to Indian people about this. I've talked to white people about this. When they are talking, so to take us back, they were talking about making Peter Parker into a black guy. And this was a while back. Now, people didn't take that well. And it wasn't like we didn't like or want a black superhero. We asked for new superheroes. Or use the ones that are already out there. Right? Sam Wilson, the Falcon, was always black. Make him a big character. And they've started doing that now. Luke Cage was a huge hit way back in the day. He was a black guy from the 70s. And they started doing that on Netflix, which I don't think was the place to do that. But there we go. So changing Peter Parker's race changes a lot about him. His entire story changes. And that was the character everybody had fallen in love with. They knew the story. They liked the story. There was something about our unique culture. There was a unique background. Everybody knew the story of Peter Parker. Uncle Ben dies, with great power comes great responsibility, all that jazz. To change his race changes his story, his perspectives, his history, his parentage, his personal culture. It changes far more than the color he's drawn in. And what did they land on? They landed finally on an entirely new Spider-Man. And it was awesome. Miles Morales, father's a black cop, mom's a Hispanic nurse. Great. Totally new story with a supporting culture that backed that up. It felt far more organic, more natural than just changing up the original Peter Parker just for the heck of it. And it's one that doesn't alter the original stories that fans were already in love with. That's what we need to do. So we've talked about this before in this context. We're being exposed to more and more of this content because eventually we're going to give up resisting. We have to prolong that as best we can and fight to change things and kind of keep things from overcorrecting even more. Right? When that happens, the goalpost will effectively be moved. When we stop resisting, we'll move the goalpost until they decide to move it again. Now, let's be honest. The goalpost has been moved. They're saying that Superman is bisexual now, but let's be honest. He's never going back to girls after this. They're saying bi just so people who are uncomfortable with any sort of homosexuality have some hope to cling to. That he'll somehow give up the pink-haired twink journalist for some blonde bombshell. Don't hold your breath. It ain't going to happen. You heard it right from the writer himself. Another straight white male savior wasn't in the cards. In fact, I'd expect even more. Why pick Superman? He's a staple of the quote-unquote patriarchy. No more, no less. He was the biggest target that they could take aim at, and they got him. What do? Oh, Clark Kent has such an established history as having a lackluster, weird romantic relationship with Lois Lane. Okay. You know what? Take him off the table. The next generation, like kids now are expecting a new Superman. You know, we got to ask, why isn't this guy aged ever as times change? Like, that's a thing. And comics are starting to address that. Fine. You know what? We'll make him have a kid and we'll do that. He'll be the new Superman. What do we do with him now? Kind of a blank slate. Uncharted territory. You know what? Let's make him like dudes. You know what? People aren't going to like that. You know what? We'll say he's bi and we'll never see the other side of it. Right? He was the biggest, he'll have the biggest effect on male culture in this arena, at least so far. Like, and again, this is not going to stop. Jordan Peterson, of all people, was compared to the devil in an issue of Captain America just a few months ago. And he's one of the most prolific psychologists out there, and he happens to clash with the LGBTQ lobby often. He was subtly referenced in Captain America by Captain America himself. And in that quote, he was compared to the devil, leading troubled men down the road that will lead them to hate and destruction. If anyone has read any of Jordan Peterson's work, you'll know that his work leads you to the exact opposite direction. He'll lead you to inner peace. But they'll make that comparison in order to trash a guy, to discredit his wonderful work, and to condition unsuspecting readers to ignore the voices of opposition. We're landing on the problem that we have today in American culture. Blake Masters, a Republican Senate candidate in Arizona, had a great response to the Superman thing. In fact, Blake Masters' response after the news of the new Superman dropped, it was perfect. He tweeted this one-liner, quote, "Not everything has to be gay." Now, what could he mean? I mean, he took a direct shot at the movement's target audience. Now, wake up, kids. You're being conditioned. That's what that said. Not everything has to be gay. What a line. Brave, that's for sure. He's challenging everyone to challenge the droning message. Do we believe this? Why do we believe it? Not everything has to be what? Excuse me. It's really a fill-in-the-blank type situation. You know, what kind of blank is it? And I'll tell you, it's an intersectional blank. And if that term is new to anyone listening, please consider yourself lucky. Also, consider yourself warned. Now, what is intersectionality? According to Wikipedia, I'm going to give you a few definitions because you're going to see some subtleties. All right. Now, according to Wikipedia, intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Now, this definition is slightly leading at the end, assuming that it will create modes of discrimination and privilege. Otherwise, it's rather solid. All right. Now, listen to this gem. From Merriam-Webster, intersectionality, the complex cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, or classism, combine, overlap, and intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. Did you guys hear that? Complex. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an opinion. In the stated definition, we've got opinion. Also, the last piece, especially, quote unquote, in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. Wow. They're not even bothering to hide this anymore. Listen, folks, if your quote unquote objective sources pitch you things that with overt or even subtle opinions of them, they're not objective. Okay? And if objective is what they claim to be, then they're lying to you. And you have reason to suspect their other objective statements. There's a good chance that they didn't just stop at the one thing you looked up that you happened to stumble upon. It's probably a deeper thing. Now, from dictionary.com, also called intersectionality theory, intersectional theory, the theory that the overlap of various social identities as race, gender, sexuality, and class contributes to the specific type of systemic oppression and discrimination experienced by an individual, often used attributively. Now, at least here we got somewhat of an objective answer, right? There was no leading. There was no saying how bad it would be. It was describing a theory. So intersectionality is the epitome of the victimhood game, okay? Social scoring. You guys have heard of this. This game is real fun, okay? The rules, simple. Whoever collects the most victim points wins. If you're black, 5 points. If you're gay, that's 10 points. Trans, 50 points. Bisexual, sorry, that's only going to get you 2 points. A woman, that'll get you 4. See, like being a woman isn't quite as cool as being the black guy, right? Being a black woman, though, 10 points. So, I mean, I'm a college educated, straight white guy who is happily married to a white woman with 3 boys, all under the age of 5. How many victim points do you think I get? I'm thinking maybe -1,000. To be honest with you, it sounds about right. And guess what? It's kind of true. I talk to people at work like I have -1,000 victim points. It does affect how you communicate because the phenomenon wasn't created. It was discovered, thought about, and described. It's disgusting, but it's a thing. It's kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway? You guys remember that show with Drew Carey as the host? He said at the very beginning, the rules are made up and the points don't matter. All right, that's intersectionality. It's the name that people gave this crazy phenomenon. Now, we as a culture began giving a positive value to victimhood, which is crazy. Embracing your victimhood is called, or being called an Uncle Tom or a coon, right? Like, those are your choices. And I was exposed to coon just this year. Like, I did not know that was a slur. But that's what you're given. You embrace victimhood or you work through it and around everybody telling you that you're a victim, and all of a sudden you're the enemy. It's awful. Now, what does intersectionality gain us as a society? I can't think of one thing. A bunch of people racing to see who can crash their dignity farther into the ground doesn't sound like a good thing. Now, there's a great video from back in 2015 that illustrates this beautifully. It's called Modern Education, spelled EDUCAYSHUN. Okay? It's a satire, and it is awesome. I'm going to post this link on the show description. It's a 7-minute YouTube video, but it's well worth the watch. All right? Intersectionality is the flip side to the argument that we've been making for some time now. Personal responsibility and owning your situation. The victim mentality is the only outcome of this philosophy of intersectionality, and it's toxic. Moreover, it's exactly the point. Changing is a difficult process. Now, every organization that tries to implement change, they'll see that there is pushback. There's actually a change curve that you can follow that can help organizations determine how much change that they can handle in a given period of time. It's extremely beneficial to them to understand this process. Now, what can I tell you about this curve, right? What if I could tell you that it could be manipulated? If I could put you in a mental state where you were prone to following an authority with little question, or made you incapable of resisting in any meaningful way, that would certainly speed things up, or at least it would allow for bigger changes to happen in the same amount of time. That's what things are building to. We're being conditioned to accept the feminization of our culture. The reason that this is is because men in particular resist in more dangerous ways than women. Our primal instinct is to resist and to do so forcefully. If our enemies, and I say enemies loosely, were able to break down that instinct to resist, there'd be no stopping the changes that they're trying to make. Slowly condition men to hate what makes them a threat. Eventually, men reject it because it's a social liability, or because we don't know any better. cradle to grave type conditioning. We get used to this over time now. Changes happen that we don't like or approve of, but we're conditioning ourselves to, and otherwise, we'd ask questions or refuse. More changes happen, but we're already accepting the first few stages of the really big stuff. So what is a little more? This is happening. Not even to us. China and Russia have been going through this process for years now, and they're actually turning the corner. An article from Breitbart by Gabrielle Reyes. China bans video games depicting effeminate males. Who knew? I'd actually agree with China on something. China's state-run gaming association recently issued new guidelines banning video games that depict homosexual relationships, effeminate males, and characters that with no clear gender. The Associated Press, the AP, reported Saturday. To continue the quote, the association instructs video game developers to stop treating video games as an apolitical medium of pure entertainment. Instead, developers should regard video games as a new art form and create respectable content accordingly. Video games should aim to promote, quote, a correct set of values and an accurate understanding of Chinese history and culture. Now, this is a sentiment that is gaining steam on the political right here in the United States. Promote and actually teach the right core values. Complete disregard for our culture can't lead anywhere. Last week, we made the case that restrictions enable development because it provides focus. In the same respect, promoting the correct values for what you're hoping the collective culture, that you'll cultivate as a culture, is just as important. You give your culture a goal to strive for. Now, China isn't above using the same methodology for its own ends. The Chinese Communist Party own all state media, so there's direct control over what they can mold their people into. Now, what are they breeding? Well, over the past several years, the Chinese Communist Party has been retaking direct control of its people. I mean, just a few years ago, Hong Kong was sacked. So now there's nothing outside of direct economic control for the government. After the sacking, protests became even more illegal, and the secret police started making people disappear. Now, before all of this went down, they weren't promoting masculine virtues. Now, why now? Well, they just took down the last monument of the victims of Tiananmen Square, right? They're getting ready for some major conflict, major takeover. Before we answer the question of why now, I want to go to another article. This one mentions Russia, which is more proof that this strategy actually works. And an article from frontpagemag.com by Don Ferber titled Russia and China Promote Masculine Values While the U.S. Celebrates Sissy Men. And it mentions some things that I'd like to take note of. Now, it starts to draw a contrast between the two countries. All right? The enemy, quote, to the U.S. is no longer expansionist China, nuclear Iran, or North Korea under Little Rocket Man, but white privilege, toxic masculinity, and carbon emissions. On assuming office, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that the coronavirus was our biggest national security challenge and climate change was an existential threat to be countered by electric cars in the motor pool. Now, let's pause there. I get how COVID-19 would be a threat to our military readiness. I'm actually not against vaccinating our military, right? Particularly when this virus is looking more and more like a virus that was being beefed up to be specifically used as a biological weapon, right? More evidence is coming out day after day that this looks more like a lab leak where they were doing this, and I forget what it's called, but they're beefing up these viruses, and they're making it more contagious, more deadly. I don't know why you would do that, but they were, and we were funding it. Great, but it looks more and more like that. I mean, what do you use that for? Like, it's either research or you're making a biological weapon. With China, you never know. But where does the Secretary of Defense have the authority to weigh in on quote unquote climate crisis? Deaths due to extreme weather have been steadily decreasing over the years. So where's the existential threat the military needs to directly concern itself with? We have enemies gearing up for war, and he's worried about climate. You catch my drift? So we're going back to the article. The Chinese, quote, the Chinese and Russians both have demographic crises on their hands. Due in part to almost 40 years of its one-child policy, the PRC, or the People's Republic of China, has a disastrously low birth rate. It's expected to lose half its population by the end of the century. Is it any wonder it's keen on promoting masculinity? It also wants its military in tip-top shape to prepare for the wars it's planning, the conquest of Taiwan being a warm-up. Now, Dan Bongino, a respected radio show host, he's very conservative, has been reporting for weeks that China is on the verge of an internal revolution. The state has made several real estate crises. It has a big real estate crisis coming up because the Chinese government has used crazy amounts of their tax dollars to build these buildings all over China for people to occupy. Most of them are vacant right now. Right? If no one's paying in rent or any of this stuff like that, it's just a shell game. Now, these companies go bust, and the people are going to be pissed that all their investments were trashed. Now, on top of the authoritarian pushes that are happening right now and did happen with COVID, which seems more and more likely that they made, and how many Chinese citizens actually died from it. Like, this wasn't just a United States issue. Thousands died in China, right? And there's a real reckoning coming. The big takeaway, people, is that a nationalist war fought over Taiwan, which is escalating right now, would be the thing to deflect people's ire towards their own government. The thought is, the Chinese government says, "Hey, I'm going to go attack Taiwan. You see, guys, we finally got Taiwan. Like they split up and we finally went back, and people are going to rally around that." Or at least that's the thought. Now, Russia did the same thing in Crimea back during the Obama administration. Quote, "Russia's population decline isn't in the future, but right now. It has 146 million people, which is less than half of our population, to hold the largest territory of any country, which stretching across 11 time zones. Smarting from the fall of the Russian Empire at the end of the Cold War, Russia, has something to prove." Now, this is a slightly satirical article, but it makes some very great points. I had a very in-depth discussion with a friend of mine on this subject. He's a very intelligent source that I do rely on to bounce some of these ideas off of. Now, he helped me get to this point. Each of these countries has pushed the masculinity boost only after the communist takeovers. Right? Real men would resist these moves. Right? So what do? They feminize them until they've completed the institutional takeover of the schools, the police, the government, all the institutions that seem to be neutral. They take over while everybody's just super docile and feminized, thereby making everyone subservient. Now, once everyone is successfully cowed, then you beef up the masculinity of those who are loyal and those who don't question. Now you've got a loyal army of men who are capable of fighting with some vigor. Now, here's what we're into. Now, this is a clip from the CIA. This is the newest recruitment advertisement. Take a listen.
I'm a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I am intersectional, but my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I am a walking declaration, a woman whose inflection does not rise at the end of her sentences, suggesting that a question has been asked. I did not sneak into CIA. My employment was not and is not the result of a fluke or slip through the cracks. I earned my way in, and I earned my way up the ranks of this organization. I am educated, qualified, and competent, and sometimes I struggle. I struggle feeling like I could do more, be more to my 2 sons, and I struggle leaving the office when I feel there's so much more to do. I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should be.
Now, I don't know about you, but that seems to be the dumbest ad they could have put out. Way to project weakness, right? I'm not an intersectional box check exercise. Then you say that, and then you proceed to tell us exactly how many boxes they've checked by hiring you. You don't inflect your sentences correctly? Is this the model of person that we're hoping to fill every position with? Of course not. I hope not. And nothing against this woman in the things that she's done, but let's project some strength here. Why are we stating it that way? We're projecting intersectional weakness to the world, particularly when things are escalating right now. China isn't going to care whether this woman is a cisgender that has anxiety. In fact, they're hoping this recruitment campaign continues to garner support for that. More importantly, things are starting to escalate. Again, teenagers, this will affect you. Taiwan is going to be the focal point of an armed conflict with China in the next 5 to 10 years. I have every reason to assume that this is going to be true. All right? Biden isn't helping any of this with his weak stances, and he's plunging our country into economic stagflation. And if you don't know what that is, that's where you've got zero to no growth, and you've got inflation at the same time. So we have no growth, and then things are beginning to be more and more expensive. So it's a recession without an actual dip. It's awful. It happened back in the 70s when Jimmy Carter was president. And you remember, for those who are listening that remember this, gas lines, huge weights, right? International debacles where we were projected as the weaklings. That's not a world we want to live in. The United States has done more good than almost any other institution in the entire world, second to the Christian church. All right? The U.S. military is a huge humanitarian organization on top of a warfighting machine. Right? Right now, Chinese warplanes are making encroachments into Taiwanese territory. The Taiwanese are doing land exercises to project strength to say that, hey, China, when you get here, we're going to be ready for you. This will either be diplomatically diffused somehow, which means we're going to pay for it, or this is going to land us in an actual ground fight. Now, nuclear proliferation and all the theories behind it would state that, hey, we both have nuclear weapons, ground wars aren't going to happen, but no one really wants to launch a nuke. I'm willing to bet there's going to be some sort of ground conflict before this thing really ends. A lot of people are talking about World War III. I don't know if it's going to get there quite yet, but I'm not taking any chances. Right? Now, in August, China launched a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile. Right? So this thing is supposed to go 5 times the speed of sound. It's supposed to be able to swerve and dodge at low, interstellar altitude. So it's like brushing between space and our actual atmosphere, which changes the trajectory that our missile defense systems, which are mostly in the north, like they're in Alaska, because China is going to launch missiles over the North Pole and come down and get us there. So our missile defense is up there. The reason why I mention all that, the trajectory that those systems are normally looked for are actually bypassed by this weapons technology. Problem with it actually surprised, quote unquote, our intelligence agencies. Right? Like they didn't know that China was capable of this. Some people are considering it it's kind of like the new, our generation Sputnik, right? Like Sputnik got launched. It was the first thing ever launched into orbit, and it happened to be by the Russians. And it kind of started the space race. Well, people are fearing a new arms race because we just got surprised that the Chinese military has weapon technology that actually beats our defenses. Right? That's nuclear capable. Ugh. Now, during a Senate Armed Service Committee hearing in March, Admiral Philip Davidson, head of the Indo-Pacific Command, warned against an increased, quote, imbalance in the region brought on by China's rapidly growing military advance. Quote, the military balance in the Indo-Pacific is becoming more unfavorable for the United States and our allies, Davidson said. With this imbalance, we are accumulating risk that may embolden China to unilaterally change the status quo before our forces may be able to deliver an effective response. Now, real quick, who do you think wins a war long term? The country that is beefing up its male population, or the country who's arguing that they should prioritize sex changes for its service members, lowering standards so that women can get into elite units, allowing women onto the battlefield at all, and who is openly trying to recruit folks with emotional problems into our intelligence agencies? This past weekend, a major general for the U.S. Army was posting pictures of her nails. Like, she had a French manicure, and she was posting pictures like, I can't believe the Army doesn't like this. That's a major general. You're telling me that that's what they're focused on, and not the fact that China has a new weapon that no one found out about? You guys decide. Who's going to win that war long term? Now, I want to end on this final thought, okay? That you guys decide the rest of this stuff, right? When men become less masculine, things get worse. All right? Men are the bulwark. We are the people who prop up our families, our military, our businesses. We are the models for leadership. All right? With our pop culture is consistently droning on in a message that tells you not to do that, they do not have either your or anybody else's best interest at heart. Now, I want to end with this final thing. So, the Daily Wire executive producer Jeremy Boring made a comment during his live event in Tennessee. It was there backstage. It's a great performance. He said that we need to come to terms with the fact that we have lost a generational battle. Okay, now I'm paraphrasing. But conservatives lost the battle of the last generation. Okay, now for a multitude of reasons. Now, guess what? That's us. You and me. We lost. The side that advocates for men to be their strongest. Conservatives lost. Now, Mr. Boring made the point, and again, I'm paraphrasing, that once we acknowledge that we've lost, we can then plan from a solid tactical place. Think about it. Where we actually are is good intelligence and good tactical planning space versus us planning from a different vantage of supposed superiority on ground that's not actually there. That's not what we plan from, and we certainly don't win with plans based on bad information. Okay? That was the most profound point I think they made during the entire event. We lost. Now what? For my listeners, we need to understand masculinity. And we need to know how and why people will try to break it down. Okay? Only then can we make the proper preparations. That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this episode, please follow and subscribe to our show for free. Also, please leave us a 5-star review. This really helps us get the word out. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, YouTube, and wherever else you get your content. Good luck out there.